This is the story of a man called the Narrator. The Narrator worked for a company in a big building, where he was employee number 427. Employee number 427's job was simple. He sat at his desk in room 427 and he read lines from a script to control the action of a person named Stanley. He wrote script for Stanley, telling him what to do, how long to do it, and in what order. This is what employee 427 did every day of every month of every year. And although others might consider it so ripping, the Narrator relished every moment that Stanley follows his orders, as though he had been made exactly for this job. And the Narrator was happy. And then one day something very peculiar happened. Something that would forever change the Narrator. Something he would never quite forget. He had been at his desk for nearly an hour, when he realized that not one single order was carried out by Stanley. No matter how hard he tried to give him instructions, he just wouldn't do anything. Never in all these years at the company had this happened. This complete chaos. Something was very clearly wrong. Shocked, frozen solid, the Narrator found himself unable to speak for the longest time. But as he came to his wits and regained his senses, he looked at his script and started reading again. He said, but as he came to his wits and regained his senses, he got out from his desk and walked out into the hallway.
As he came to his wits and regained his senses, he got up from his desk and walked out into the hallway.
But Stanley didn't walk out. He was just mindlessly walking back and forth in the room. The Narrator was anxious. Why didn't Stanley walk out of the room? There's nothing in there. No items to collect, no people to talk to, no story to progress. Finally, Stanley decided to leave the room. The Narrator was relieved. He decided Stanley should go to the staff lounge.
Stanley decided to go to the staff lounge to check on his co-workers. He never functioned well by himself and constantly needed support and guidance from others, so the thought of total solitude was terrifying to him.
The Narrator was a control freak and constantly needed to keep everything in line, so the thought of Stanley acting on his own was terrifying to him. There were a set of 2 doors in the office, leading to different story outcomes. Stanley could have entered any of these doors and got a satisfying experience, but the Narrator had to choose one for him, because that's what he thought was the correct story. So he told Stanley to enter the door on the left.
When Stanley came to a set of 2 open doors, he entered the door on his left.
Oh no, he didn't! Stanley entered the door on the right. The Narrator was surprised and a little irritated. But maybe Stanley simply entered the wrong door by accident, so the Narrator urged Stanley to go back to the correct route.
This was not the correct way to the employee lounge, and Stanley knew it perfectly well. So he turned left at the first open door and walked back in the right direction.
As Stanley entered the door, the Narrator was happy that he could resume his job of telling Stanley what he should do and how he should feel.
And like that, he was back on track.
He wanted Stanley to be terrified, because then the story would make sense.
As Stanley entered the lounge, he was horrified to find not a single person here. He decided he would walk up to see his boss, hoping that he would find an answer there.
But how could one tell if Stanley is horrified? No one can see Stanley's face. He wasn't saying anything. And the fact that he was messing up the room seems like he's actually having fun. But the Narrator ignored it. He was too eager to move the story forward. He gave another order.
Coming to a staircase, Stanley walked upstairs to his boss's office.
But Stanley didn't do what he said. He went downstairs instead. The Narrator didn't want to admit he lost control over Stanley, so he made excuses for his failure.
But Stanley just couldn't do it. He considered the possibility of facing his boss, of admitting that he had left his post during work hours. He might be fired for that. And in such a competitive economy, was it really worth taking that risk? All because he believed everyone had disappeared?
As the Narrator continued to make excuses, something occurred to him.
Maybe,
he thought to himself.
maybe I am crazy.
Controlling a person simply by telling him what to do? There's almost no other explanation for it. And a nagging fear began to creep up in his mind. Questions that had been there all along, he just hadn't put his finger on them yet. For example, why would Stanley look up when he cleverly implied that he should look down?
For example, why couldn't he see his feet when he looked down?
Why didn't every door close properly like they were supposed to?
Why did doors close automatically behind him wherever he went?
And for that matter, why aren't Stanley running around the office like he expected him to do?
And for that matter, these rooms were starting to look pretty familiar. Was he just walking around in circles?
Why did Stanley just stand there like a boss? Why did he still say, "Was he just walking around in circles?" when Stanley was clearly not moving? Could it be because Stanley wasn't an actual human being, but merely a character in a video game controlled by some lonely nerd who's now happened to be AFK?
Where am I?
He thought. And the more he found himself unable to answer these questions, the more questions continued to arise until he came to the issue that had been slowly boiling until he could ignore it no longer. Why is there a voice in my head dictating everything that I'm doing and thinking? Suddenly, the narrator realized the similarity between him and Stanley. What if he's just another Stanley, taking orders without knowing it? Or maybe he's the real Stanley, and the man on the screen was one of those people who know what actually happened, but was toying with him this whole time.
No!
The narrator screamed.
I need to get out of here. I need to know that there's something out there. I need to know it's not just all in my head.
And he screamed and touched at his skull as the voice grew harsher and the music in the background rose higher and higher. And then, moments before collapsing to the ground, the narrator clenched his fists and screamed to anyone that might be listening.
I'm not real. I'm not real. Don't believe any of it. None of it's real.
And then, everything went black. This is a story about a woman named Mariella. Mariella woke up on the day like any other. She got dressed, went to work, clocked in, clocked out, and then she walked home. But her walk on this day was interrupted by the body of a man who had stumbled through town talking and screaming to himself and then collapsed dead on the sidewalk. Moments after seeing him, she would turn, run to the nearest police station and call for an ambulance. But for just a few brief seconds, she merely stood there, unable to move. The tragedy was not the death of a single person. It was that she would never know this man's story, never hear in his own words what had happened to him, or what he believed had happened to him. For to know these things would be to exist inside the head of the man himself, so all she could do was observe from a distance and pity him. But Mariella had places to be and people to meet with, very important people, whose impressions of her would affect her career and indeed the rest of her life. She stood there for only a moment, looking down at the body, and then she ran.